This episode of the UAE Tech Podcast is sponsored by Kaspersky. Kaspersky is offering our listeners a discount using the promo code ALBAWEBA that can be used on any of Kaspersky's consumer products on kas.pr/ALBAWEBA. One more time, that's kas.pr/ALBAWEBA. This episode was recorded with the generous support of the podcast studio at the Rove Hotel in downtown Dubai. From our offices in Media City, Dubai, this is the UAE Tech Podcast, a product of ALBAWEBA Group. Podcast sponsors receive EDM promotion, distribution across all major podcast networks, and publication on ALBAWEBA Business. Gold and Silver sponsors receive a 6-month Pro Plus account on Signal Presswire. Go to bit.ly, that's bit.ly/sponsor UAE Tech Podcast for more information.
Red team initially it was it is a terminology in fact used in the army, and in the military at large, and it's used to if we wanna talk at a high level, stress test a certain organization or government institution. Stress test it in the sense what a threat actor could do if he can get access, and therefore we have to know what are the threat actors that are likely to go after a certain institution, and then use the same techniques that they usually use, that threat actor, and try to play those out, execute those tactics, and see how the organization respond to this.
Much of the discussion on cybersecurity concerns, cyber. Computers surveilling computers, algorithms detecting algorithms, or AI just scanning massive amounts of data. What is often lost is a focus on human beings. Human beings, after all, do work in cybersecurity. And it's a field that itself is rapidly evolving into an established profession in which a combination of technical and analytical skills are increasingly required. A lot of the discussion on the fourth industrial revolution around the world covers technology replacing human beings. And while that's true across many industries, it's not always the entire story. The field of cybersecurity is a great window into an emerging industry that is rapidly professionalizing, on a search for new talent. It's here that human intelligence, human response teams, and hybrid skill sets are very much in demand. So today we're talking with Maher Yamout, Senior Security Researcher of Global Research and Analysis at Kaspersky, on humans in cybersecurity. Today we're talking to Maher Yamout from Kaspersky Security. Maher, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, John.
So you are a Senior Security Researcher on the Global Research and Analysis team. What does that involve?
Mm-hmm. So I'm part of a global team who focuses on threat analysis and threat intelligence and reverse engineering malware, meaning we uncover and discover advanced persistent threat actors, cyber criminals, and how they operate globally. I'm part of the team who focuses on the region, meaning the Middle East, Turkey, and Africa. Obviously, the UAE is part of this region.
Okay. And in terms of the nuts and bolts of the team, day-to-day tasks, what does a security researcher at Kaspersky or other cybersecurity firms, what are the kind of things they're looking at?
Mm-hmm. So in the general sense, we start by understanding what's technology look like in the region of interest to us, at least. So obviously we are part of a global team, and each team has its own focus. Some of the team members even focus on more specific issues like industrial control systems, IoT, and so on. But in the general sense, we focus on advanced persistent threat research. We cover advanced threat actors and cyber criminals as well. So we start by understanding the technology, who's operating where, what are the kind of issues, technology-related issues, a specific country, a specific industry is interested in. What is the trend in a specific time, in a specific country, and so on. And also we try to predict kind of the future and what are the threat actors likely to go after in the coming days, weeks, or maybe years. And that's all based on our understanding of the threat landscape, of the evolving technologies. And even we try to play with technology, right? So we have to understand how specific malware works, how specific technology works, how do they operate all together, how do they interconnect all together, and how companies and businesses and governments use that technology, so we can understand how a specific threat actor would affect them in a way or another.
Okay, interesting. So one of the things that we discussed on a previous episode with your colleague Imad Hafar was that the level of data and the complexity of some of these issues was evolving and scaling rapidly to a point where human interdiction was really reaching a point of impossibility. It's just so much data and so much to look at that, in a way, algorithms and machines are your first filter, if you will. But there's also this interesting discussion to be had about the fact that there are still human beings providing analysis, doing research, passing a lot of this information, and providing best practice in the industry, into governments, into the private sector. So, I mean, that is an interesting story there in itself, because we always, one of the, themes of the digital economy is that human beings are being replaced, but really your role kind of suggests that it's a bit more hybrid, a bit more complicated than that.
Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, technology was brought in to support humankind, right? It's a kind of extended arm to support us in analyzing things and understanding things and so on. But in the terms of cybersecurity and machine learning and AI and those kind of technologies, they are really coming in to automate most of the things. Obviously, you just mentioned technology is evolving, rapidly scaling, and so on. So we need some technology even to support us in analyzing all these evolving threats, all these technology issues, and so on, at a larger scale, at a faster pace as well. And obviously, the technology and these kind of technologies specifically are to support us, not to replace us. At the end of the day, technology or these kind of technologies like the machine learning and artificial intelligence and those things do not have context, at least in the general sense as far as now. And because they don't have context, they may have false actions. And therefore, the human aspect of the intervention is us as analysts intervene at some point, making sure the system is working as it's supposed to be. It's not flagging false alerts and so on. So if we want to summarize it at large, 90 to 95% it's all machine stuff that support us in analysis and so on. And the rest will be human analysts injecting their thoughts, injecting their analysis, injecting their validation, triaging, and so on into that whole system.
And what's interesting is that is a story that perhaps isn't always told. So when we discuss cybersecurity, we're trying to learn what the digital landscape looks like. We're trying to learn what the role of machine intelligence and AI and these kind of systems are. But that 5% of human input is actually quite interesting. So in terms of that triage, how does that work? When a human being goes in and has all these vast data sets, what is the system whereby they can, as you mentioned, get context and then somehow filter the massive amounts of information, and then somehow provide recommendations. Mm-hmm. How does a cybersecurity firm go about creating that kind of role? When a human researcher goes into work, where do they begin?
That's an interesting question, and we got a lot of times we got asked that question. Like, how do you figure out things? How do you start researching in the first place? Well, it all starts by people's interest, right? We are client support in that aspect. So what we try to do is understand the clients, understand the economies, the governments, our large industries, and so on, and try to understand what do they have in common sometimes, what do they have as crown jewels, and so on. And then we understand how a threat actor would operate to get into those crown jewels. And then we start analyzing things. Sometimes it gets even more creative with some threat actors. And then we start analyzing through our data set. Now, our data set is obviously huge. Therefore, we leveraged big data analytics, and then we try to filter out the things that we don't need. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, from this entire data pool, or data lake, as they call it sometimes, we end up having what we need to focus on for research, for actual analysis. So it's about to understand what can go wrong, how it can go wrong, some analytical techniques that are out there, we use them, and then we filter out everything that is not needed so we can focus on what's important, on the meat of the data.
Mm. Okay, so that makes sense. So in terms of training qualifications, this was a discussion I know that's being held in the UAE and overseas as well. What kind of qualifications or training does someone get to be able to start this role? Mm-hmm. Are there globally recognized certification requirements? To what extent are strategic and analytical skills important? Because, we always talk about coding skills or technical skills, mm-hmm. but the kind of more classical skills of human analysis looks like they still play a role. So what are the qualifications and the aptitudes for someone who's interested in this position?
Right. That's really an important question, especially for newcomers into this field. We get to see sometimes people want to be a researcher out of university just immediately, and that becomes a bit of a challenge because they don't have an understanding of how technology operates in the first place. They don't have experience and, in fact, practical experience in technology. Because if you look at it from a different angle, what is a researcher? He doesn't have to abide to certain rules in the general sense, like how they work. They research random stuff. They learn a lot of stuff. They read different things, not necessarily in the technology, because some aspects in human life affects technology. So a researcher would really, especially in technology research and cybersecurity research, they have to know, as you just mentioned, coding. I'm not saying like deep level coding, extreme coding, no. At least they can understand what they read. Some aspects of IT in general, at the end of the day, a researcher would troubleshoot most of the time. And obviously the focus of the research that you want to touch on is what you have to learn. So, for example, if I want to understand, if I want to do red teaming, penetration testing, and some of the defensive cybersecurity tasks, I have to know what is IT, how do IT work, so I can understand how to protect it. If a researcher does not understand how technology works, he cannot protect it, he cannot analyze it, he cannot analyze threats that affects it. So it's really important to gradually go on, gradually learn the skills, such as coding, networking systems, and then get into how offense work, how defense work, and then you can probably start researching threats that affect certain industries, certain technologies, and so on. So it's a learning curve, definitely. It's a career path. You cannot be immediately a researcher generally speaking, out of university, let's say. I mean, sometimes we do hear some people or some organizations wants to the fast track, but unfortunately in this field, there's no fast track per se.
It sounds like it's a very new combination of skills. And certainly when I was going into university, having that compatibility between the kind of analytical skills and the technical skills would have been very difficult to kind of cultivate those skills in a formal setting. So it's really fascinating, that insight you've given, and it begs all sorts of other questions about how we train individuals, the education process, merging technical and more classical skills. Super interesting. But you also use some technical terms. So red teams, which sounds very exciting. What is that?
Right. So red team, initially it was it is a terminology in fact used in the army.
Okay.
And in the military at large, and it's used to, if we want to talk at a high level, stress test a certain organization or government institution. Stress test it in the sense what a threat actor could do if he can get access. And therefore, we have to know what are the threat actors that are likely to go after a certain institution, and then use the same techniques that they usually use, that threat actor, and try to play those out, execute those tactics, and see how the organization respond to this. How can they detect it? How can they monitor this process? And then, the whole concept, so the offense side of things is red teaming. The blue teaming is the defensive side, and both combined is purple teaming. That's what the terminology nowadays is. So red teaming is about offense and testing the organization versus a threat actor that is likely to go after it.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
And so, again, I suppose that's only something you can train for, if that's the right word, when you're in the arena, when you're in the company and you're seeing, the different threat actors and the different forms of defense and offense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's... but again, at the end of the day, you cannot do a red teaming if you do not have a threat actor profile. And how you get that threat actor profile is by getting into threat intelligence services. And those threat intelligence services will give you the threat actors as a profile, as a persona, and what are the tactics and techniques used by those threat actors. And then you'll just pick the one that is likely to go after you and then play them out.
Okay, so that makes sense. I think one of the fascinating things and at times frustrating things about this conversation is that there's such a popular culture around hacking, and one of my favorite channels here in Dubai is NBC2 because it has all the movies on, and they had Die Hard 4.0 on a couple of days ago, just before we had this discussion today. And I don't know if you've seen it, but the whole movie is about, something called a fire sale, where hackers and cyber terrorists attack the critical infrastructure of the United States, threatening, the financial system and the energy systems and all of this. And, a hacker saves the day along with Bruce Willis and some one-liners. And, it's great stuff, but it also does distract in a way from understanding the on-the-ground skills, the slightly less glamorous side of it, where you are employing these systems, be it red teaming or, training cybersecurity analysts as to how to react under pressure. So I wondered if we could talk a bit more about that, about the detail. So once, for example, a threat is detected, how does an incident response work generally? What are the kind of different paths a cybersecurity professional might look at?
Sure. I mean, so in a company, in a target company who got affected by a threat actor, or by, let's say, they flagged an incident, right? They, in general sense, in concepts, if they follow the international regulations, international standards, and so on, they should engage in incident response. And the incident response exercise is basically responding to an incident. And they do it in certain phases. certain steps. They may differ between a company and another. It depends on how mature the environment is and so on. But effectively, they want to, first of all, the first step is to identify what is the real incident. Because, non-techie people, and I don't blame them, they just say stuff, right? So the role of an incident responder is to get the facts right, right? So when the incident responder gets the facts right through the identification phase, they will start to analyze at a high level what went wrong, what was the trigger, what is the extent of this incident. So that's the incident intake. And after the incident intake, they try to contain the situation. Now, why do you need to contain the situation? Because in an ongoing incident, the response, the incident is active sometimes. And therefore, you need to assess the scope of the incident at a high level and then get into the containment phase. Once you rightfully scope the incident, you can contain it as much as possible. Because sometimes we do see certain cases or certain situations where the scoping is not as it should be. And then you discover after they contain it and finalize all the steps in the incident response process, they will get infected again. And that's because they didn't do the scoping right. So once you finalize the scoping and make it right, you do have a better chance as containment. And then you start analyzing what happened exactly, how did the incident affected the business, and what is the tactics and techniques used during this incident, what is the extent, is there data leakage, and so on. And then you move on with the steps and then remove all the malicious files to start getting back into business. And after you get back into business, you have this phase where you monitor for the same indicators that you have seen in the incident response or in the incident analysis. Because it's important to understand and to validate what you did in the first place. So after you contain, you analyze, you eradicate the malware or the intrusion indicators, you have to monitor for some time, and then you can get back fully to normal. And then the last step in the incident response process is the lessons learned, which is the reporting and understand where did the incident response fail, what can we do better for next time, can we predict the next incident, can we scale certain things, can we automate certain things so we can get better the next time. So that's the incident response process at large.
Interesting. So I mean, it really is a hybrid skill set, but on top of that, there's one other area that we haven't discussed, which of course is the industry focus, because surely, presumably, some of these things, some of the methodologies and the cybersecurity training will depend on what industry you're in. So how, does that work? Because again, it's a global security team, but surely, the threat actors and the forms of defense that are employed, let's say, in, a large online digital community or a large infrastructure project or a mass event are very, very different. So within your security teams, do you also have kind of industry-focused practitioners?
Of course. And that becomes an important aspect for the company at large. Where do they want to focus? But also what the client expects. You cannot focus on an industry that maybe they don't have the budget, or they don't really care about cybersecurity at large, or it doesn't affect them. So if it's a space industry, let's say, so if it's a space industry, maybe cybersecurity is not the main topic in there. So not only us as Kaspersky, but probably every vendor wouldn't care much until it becomes the mainstream. Until it becomes technology evolve and scale in that space, then it becomes an interest. Now, at the same time, what we focus on mostly is the government sector and what is associated with it, technology, the finance sector, obviously, healthcare. The main industries that we focus on are there, and there are dedicated team members for each of these industries. All these threat actors differ, and the techniques even used are different in most of the cases. So that becomes an important aspect for the threat analyst or for the researcher to focus on and hone in his skills in that area, in that direction.
And one of the discussions about this podcast as well is the speed at which the economy is changing. So we reference the fourth industrial revolution a lot. And, the idea that new industries are rising quickly, and elements of our lifestyle are changing too, from how we order food to how we travel around a city. But as the economy changes, so too does the landscape of the cybersecurity space. How easy is it once you train your teams to adapt at the speed of the economy, and particularly the speed of the digital economy?
Sure. I mean, it's not that easy as people may think. People usually see the results of research. They don't see the efforts behind it, the funding behind it, and the amount of people working on this new trending thing. At the end of the day, it's a matter of time, not a matter of resources, most of the time at least. So it takes time. Things takes time to learn the new technologies, to practice with it. You have to buy the technology and then play with it and then see how it operates. Once you understand how it operates, you try to understand what is the attack surface, what kind of threat they can apply on, and so on. So it's really a matter of time, a lot of work in the back end, a lot of practice, a lot of testing as well. It's not easy.
So, in terms of jargon, because we were looking at, as you said, it's not easy, and we were looking at some of the language and semantics of how this works. And one is knowledge support and cyber threat research. What do both of these terms mean?
So cyber threat research is understanding who is a threat actor, how do they operate, and which kind of industries or targets are they mostly interested in. So because, a threat, even most of the time, people think about it as the malware. But if we want to back off a bit, the threat is usually human. So there usually is a human behind the malware operating. And a threat is adaptive, right? So a threat, how do you identify a threat? A threat is someone or something who has the intent, capability, and opportunity to affect harm or to apply harm to a certain target or a certain person. And that threat changed. So you have to understand what changed it and research the factors that affect it as well. So that's cyber threat research in general. The next term was
knowledge support.
Knowledge support. So knowledge support is probably trying to understand what is important to us and how we can enable it, right? And enabling it, maybe it comes as secondments to someone else, but we have to understand at large what do we need and how we can fulfill those needs, and try to make it work either by theory, by practice, or secondment.
Okay, thank you for that summary. It makes sense. So moving into the UAE a little bit, there has been a bit of a discussion on whether or not cybersecurity qualifications in the UAE should be harmonized or accredited. And there was a discussion on something called a Dubai Cyber Index. Are you aware of this, and why is there this pressure for some kind of formal accreditation in the industry with regard to human talent?
Mm-hmm. So, probably in the industry there are some fakes. Obviously, companies globally have part of it authentic. Some of them are fakes, and they operate everywhere, right? So, the governments usually, what do is they want to streamline things, to make things operate the way they should, or the way they see it at least. So what do they do is provide high-level standards, sometimes regulations to certain industries and so on. And accreditation is part of that process of understanding who is doing what? Is he who's supposed to be? Does he know what he's claiming to know? And so on and so on. So accreditation is really coming as acknowledging someone or a company that they can operate in that space in the general sense. And it's important because without it, you open the doors for anyone to get into things. You don't know if they are authentic, if there's other backgrounds for this work and so on. So it's really about securing who can work. And the Cyber Index also is one of the ways you can measure cybersecurity effectiveness in certain countries and certain companies and certain industries. And it's important because it elevates the security level in each of these companies and industries.
And it's also a really interesting sign, again, of how there are new industries rising and regulation is important. You know, when we go to see a doctor, it's understood that they have to be accredited. So for those wondering, why is the UAE Tech Podcast in this episode really talking about the kind of more human role, which isn't something we always do? It's because it shines a light on the wider role of technology within the economy, within industry. And this idea of accrediting individuals in cybersecurity, elevating it to a level of importance alongside other industries like law or medicine, or elements of engineering, you know, that are critical, is super interesting because it suggests, again, that, you know, the digital economy, that what happened in cyberspace is becoming critically important, and that the people that play a role within that industry are also beginning to become much more recognized. And that also feeds into all sorts of other things which we discussed today about kind of training and how students might access this industry and how someone might develop the skill sets needed to understand this kind of a role. So sometimes these questions do have actually a big bearing on the wider technology market.
Yep.
So, yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, to finish today, a good question might be, what is your advice for young people in the UAE or the region who are interested in this field but really have no understanding of where to start, of how to enter it, of what the next step should be?
So that's a very important question. At the end of the day, it's about a personal interest. And I can say comfortably that the future is technology. And technology is touching on each part of our life. So it's the right time. Certain governments, certain countries in the region, especially the UAE, is working hardly on increasing the human knowledge support. They are trying hard to make more analysts, more cyber, more technical people, and that's really important. There are some official channels you can follow. Some of them are in the universities, but obviously the internet is huge. You can just research how you can be a researcher, how you can be a hacker, how you can be a cyber defender, and so on. And then from there, the steps will just roll and uncover. And it's really important to be part of a community. There are some communities in the UAE and regional and global who are really passionate about cybersecurity. So get into those groups and try to learn more from them. And then you will be guided.
Well, there you go. Maher Yamout, thank you so much for your time today.
Pleasure.
For more information on cybersecurity solutions in the UAE, be sure to check out Kaspersky's very own automated awareness platform at asap.kaspersky.com. That's asap.kaspersky.com. That offers training created by leading cybersecurity experts to help protect small enterprises who cannot withstand the blow of a cyber attack. Also remember that Kaspersky is offering listeners a discount using the promo code ALBAWABA, which can be used on any of Kaspersky's consumer products on kas.pr/ALBAWABA. One more time, that's kas.pr/ALBAWABA. You can also follow Kaspersky on social media at Kaspersky.